we'll just make a start since the auditorium is completely full and there is no more space for anyone to come in, so we'll just make a start. As you already know, my name is Arif Rahman. I'm a Bangladeshi British blogger. Been blogging for almost 10 years now. The topic today is Bangladeshi secular blogger killings. Thanks to Goldsmiths Atheist, Secularist and Humanist Society for inviting me. Absolutely, it's an honor from my part to be able to talk about my colleagues in a different country where there is some interest about Bangladesh and what's been happening there. I have not written the whole speech, so I'll kind of freestyle and feel free to interrupt me midway and ask anything. But we also have a Q&A session at the end, so maybe want to kind of hold on to your thoughts. How many of you actually know about Bangladesh? This is not the first time you've heard about the term Bangladesh or the country Bangladesh, right? You've heard about it before? Of course. We are recently doing quite well with cricket. I don't know how many of you follow cricket. There has been some interest in it. Before, a few years back, the image was of flood. For some reason, everybody said Bangladesh, and images of flood would come into people's mind. Flood is gone, actually. We don't have, it's opposite now, we don't have much water. But that's just to ask. Before we go into Bangladesh and this, jump into the actual topic, I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction and history of the Bangladesh itself. I won't bore you with too much. I have a stolen video clip from an YouTube. I can't be bothered to actually make one myself, but this one serves the purpose. It's like 2 minutes, and we'll go from there.
When the British ended their rule over the Indian subcontinent in 1947, the territory was split into Pakistan and India. The two regions were divided along religious lines, with Pakistan containing the majority of Muslims and India the majority of Hindus. The former British Indian province called Bengal was located on the opposite side of the Indian subcontinent from Pakistan, but was also divided along Hindu-Muslim lines. The eastern portion was renamed East Pakistan and allocated as a Pakistani province. Almost immediately, the Bengalis were subject to ethnic oppression by their new Pakistani rulers. Bengali culture was forced to submit to that of West Pakistan, and there was a large effort to replace the Bengali language with Urdu. After years of Bengali calls for independence, West Pakistan began what is by many considered a genocide of the Bengali people. In March of 1971, Pakistan's military junta enacted Operation Searchlight, in which soldiers rounded up and executed those of Bengali ethnicity, regardless of their religious affiliation. This sparked the 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War. For 8 months, the Pakistani military killed between 500,000 and 3 million Bengali people and raped as many as 400,000 women. East Pakistan finally became the independent state of Bangladesh. To this day, Pakistan has refused to acknowledge what has been called the Bengali genocide and the overall number of casualties. In 2000, a Pakistani diplomat was kicked out of Bangladesh for claiming that only 26,000 Bengali people had died during the war. Moreover, trials from the war are still ongoing, with 2 opposition figures recently executed in Bangladesh for war crimes. Bangladeshis are still calling on Pakistan to recognize its atrocities and teach them as a part of its history. However, Pakistan has refused to do so and has even referred to a militant leader executed for war crimes as being killed for his loyalty to Pakistan.
So, you can tell this video was about relation between Bangladesh and Pakistan. Pakistan we already know, and the image of Pakistan, the history matters a little bit because of the Islamist connotation or context. These are the photos of what Bengal should be or was before. So 1947, when the British left, as you saw, the British Queen actually reigned over the Indian subcontinent for almost 200 years. And during that time, the only purpose of British was to do business in their own terms. So, but during that time, the whole of Indian subcontinent was a mix between the Hindu religion and also the Muslim religion, which is actually an import from Saudi Arabia, as we know, which is a very good exporter. the local religion, Hindu religion, and some Buddha religion is actually the product of that land. But the imported religion, Islam, was flourishing, but not rapidly. And the reason it only flourished a little bit over 600 years in that region, because of a problem with Indian, the religion itself, the Hindu religion, because it had a caste system, as they call it. So obviously, I don't know how many of you realize that in a modern society, you have the elites and you have the middle class, the lower class. But people can jump between classes over their generation. For example, if they work hard, if they get lucky, etc., etc. Over one or two generations, they can become an elite. But the Hindu caste system, if you are the top tier, you can never become, if you are the bottom tier, you can never become the top tier. So the top tier was called Brahmins, and the bottom tier was called the Vaishya and the Shudra, which is the slave kind. If you are born in a slave family, you are never allowed to actually go into a Brahmin, which is the top tier, who actually did no work other than just practice culture and rule over the rest of the people. That was the Hindu system, which ruled over around 3,000, 4,000 years in that region. So the people who were born and kind of generation-wise born were deprived of any education, culture, etc. That means that strain of people were not so very, polished and fine. So when Islam came, obviously people always wanted to, progress. And Islam came in and said, we don't have any caste system. You can always join us and become, one. So a lot of the Vaishyas and the lower caste converted in bulk to Islam, and they moved to the land you saw on the right-hand side, the Bangladesh region. So the whole of Bangladesh, majority of Muslims in Bangladesh is actually converted Hindus over 600 years. So the reason I'm saying this is to show you the quality of people. I know some might find it really very discriminatory view, but if you compare between a human, for example, an English person or a Swedish person going through their school system and becoming a very fine human, cultured, knowledgeable, educated, the people from that generation never gets to get those sort of benefits. So they remain, I call Homo sapiens rather than human, because they never get that sort of enrichment. But the culture, the Hindu religion was actually based on cultural activities. These are cultural activities, but they stem from Hindu religion, but they are cultural activities. This is a New Year, Bengali New Year celebration happening in Bangladesh that stem from Indian subcontinent, the Hindu religion, but we kind of adapted it and it became no religion. It's just a cultural activity. Another one, this is a procession happens on 14th of April, which is the Bengali New Year, and it happens throughout the whole country. Lots of proper rally that happens, just celebrating, and it's not a religious thing. This is also Bengali culture. These are the traditional Bengali dress. Most of the Bengali people would actually wear something like that. This also shows the women of Bengal, and the corner picture is actually very old. Not very old, as in 1971, when there was a war happening. Women fighters, obviously you can see they have guns and stuff, but the facial expressions I would draw your attention to. It's quite proud. Compared to, I don't know if you can notice, but I may have developed an eye. Women in Bangladesh these days obviously goes through the social oppression and everything, so they don't have that look on their faces anymore. But individuals may do. If I don't make any sense, you can ask questions later on. So the reason I'm showing you all this, you don't see many Islamist headscarf in those pictures, do you? Not many. Maybe one or two here and there. But this is typical Bangladeshi Bengali that we cherish, and I personally want, believe, and I've seen. But that was cultural element, and but what Bangladesh is not really a rich country, it's a poor country. Maybe it's coming up and it's got some numbers going for it, but generally, this is what you will see if you kind of come out of your five-star hotel and start wandering around the cities and go into the villages. This is a city, waterlogged city. It's not the flood. It's just one evening of monsoon rain made that. A lot of people who don't have enough, shelters and the basic human needs, they don't get it. They just sleep in the streets. It's not as extreme weather-wise, so people don't really die if they sleep on the streets. Weather-wise, it never gets really hot or never gets really cold. If you happen to drive through in a car, if you get stuck in a traffic jam, one or two people or many more will actually come and beg. It's a train, but you can't see the train. It's buried. It's not everyday thing. It happens twice a year. People go back to their village from the cities to celebrate the yearly Eid, the Muslim religious thing. So the reason I'm showing this is that to show you the lack of resources available. And although they say we are coming up, a Bangladeshi apologist, I will call them, they will say, oh, Bangladesh is doing really well, we are coming up and we are doing progress. But this is not a sign of progress, and this happens every year. So in that very small space, Bangladesh has 170 million people. 170 million, if you can imagine. Today is 9/11. America went through its 9/11 today. And can you imagine how many people voted for Donald Trump? 56 million, almost half of America, right? Just to put it in perspective, we have 170 million people in that very small space of land. It is heavily dense, almost the most dense place on Earth. Now, jumping to the topic now. So you obviously saw a lot of poor people and everything, and government can't really provide for enough resources, enough education system for people. So what happens is a lot of young people whose families can't really afford to send them to school, or they have other thoughts in their head, they send them to madrasas. We have a huge number of madrasa, and the total amount of school-going pupil, at least 2/3, no, not 2/3, I would say 1/3 go to madrasas. I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but it's alarming. The reason I say go to madrasa is that all they do in a madrasa is study the religious scripture, and no physics, no maths, no English, no history, no language, only about religious scripture. And there are lots of them. The only prospect for them when they come out of this education so-called system is to become a mullah or an imam, a religious leader. And obviously you can see there isn't many, it's a small country. Anywhere that was possible to make a mosque, build a mosque, they already built one, and you don't really need that many mullah to run a mosque, and they're unproductive. So we have a surplus of, and obviously the Saudis have a very vested interest in Bangladesh, because the whole of Middle East is obviously, it's building a lot of buildings for the last decade or so. The cheap labor that they get is actually from Bangladesh. So this 170 million people you see, a lot of them go to Middle East, and they are economic slaves. So this is the Saudi interest, is to produce Homo sapienses rather than humans. So this is another shot, and at the bottom you can see, because they have surplus and they are cuckoo in their head, they're used by political, I should say forces, not parties themselves, but political elements that leverages the madrasa students, and they can be used. If you just say, this bus driver, for example, this bus driver has said something really bad about Muhammad, come and beat this guy to death, and they'll be more than happy to do. If you ask them, have you heard this guy do that? Have you seen this guy do that? So we don't care. Our teacher has said that. it's actually like that. If their teacher says that this guy has said something really bad about their prophet, these guys will just jump into it. They're that brainwashed. And bit of escalation. When they are slightly angry, they can be quite dangerous. I don't want to say Muslim generally, because obviously Muslim, but they're Islamist. So they believe that Islam should be, obviously it's a way of life, but also Islam should be taking part in a political system. And they want their political system, which is the Sharia and an Islamic country where there's going to be no women leading them. There should be men, and then completely separate judicial system. And all those things that comes packaged with a Saudi brainchild. The corner few boys, this is quite recent. These are quite different because all these come from poor families. These five comes from very opulent family. Just to show that it's not only poor people who's becoming more and more radicalized in Bangladesh. These are the ISIS recruits in Bangladesh, and recently in diplomatic zone, actually this year, 3-4 months ago, they successfully ran an operation and killed 17 people, 10 of them Japanese, the rest Italian. It was like a diplomatic area. It was a restaurant. They took over, they killed everybody, not very nicely, and they seized the whole place for the whole night. In the following morning, the military had to go in and kind of slaughtered them, and then they discovered all this brutality has happened. They were very rich people, still brainwashed to thinking that Islam should take over the world. This is a oxymoron. The last two, it says, don't insult Islam, and then it says Islam is a tolerant religion. So the reason I gave all this background is to show you and understand you what we are up against. Who are we? We are kind of the humanist thinking who thinks that United Nations Human Rights Declaration is something that everybody should adhere to, and humans should not have any kind of division, and men and women should have the same equal rights. All these good and nice things that an idealist can think of. And mixed with obviously a little bit of militant atheism from the Four Horsemen, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, and Christopher Hitchens, who died. They're very eloquent and very good in and convincing us that if you believe in humanity, humanism, and etc., you should be voicing it and should do it against the forces that actually is preventing the human rights thing to come to life. Anyways, we are general people like them. We as in the bloggers. In our country, it was different. Around 2006, 2007, internet became available. Obviously, internet was there before, but the ability for somebody to write something on a page on internet and somebody to actually go and read it and comment on it became really a thing. And people like me who were actually living in the UK at the time, and people like me all over the world, and also in Bangladesh, suddenly saw each other. And then we saw that all of our thoughts are kind of the same, that we don't like this, what's happening in Bangladesh. We need to talk against it and the bullshit that it tries to feed us. So obviously these guys, as you can see, they have very high tolerance level, pun intended. They did not like it. They did not like it, and they started threatening us between 2007 to 2011, 12. They obviously threatened us, and we went into some sort of list, and lists were being circulated, but we never thought this would become a reality. I say that all the time because at that time when we were talking about it, in our head, we thought everybody was like us, that we can write and we can argue, we can obviously have a flame war between us, we can troll each other, that's fine, but nobody would take these things to their hands. Nobody would actually literally kill us or hurt us or think. Little did we know. So in 2013, a colleague of ours, very good satirist, was hacked in front of his house. So the first murder took place, and we were obviously shocked and quite traumatized. But what followed is quite interesting. The media, the newspapers, the political parties, everybody in one single voice started to find what he wrote. Their focus was what he was doing, why he was killed. People were quite interested to find out why he was killed. Somebody was killed and quite brutally, and this should be taken care of, this should stop. No, nobody was arguing about that. Everybody was interested why. And some people obviously was making it more and more like an issue that this is happening. So I want to show you this. This guy is a famous Islamist leader in Bangladesh, and he officially said this to BBC. No one should dare to speak against Muhammad. No one is allowed to do that. And we have the right and the power to punish such people. He being the leader of the Islamist forces we saw earlier. And that sort of statement gave legitimacy for, there is a big madrasa in Bangladesh called Hifazat Madrasa, and they created a stampede. They came to the city and they started protesting against the government, saying that government has to do something about these atheist bloggers. Government obviously, we thought government would say, freedom of speech and human rights, etc. But government actually formed a committee, including some ministers and some leaders, religious leaders, saying that what should be done. And big files of screenshots, what we have written, was handed over to the ministers. And following day, a list of offending bloggers was published. My name was at the very top. And since then, that list has become the infamous hit list of 84 bloggers. That list became quite international and everybody knew about it. And then from end of 2014, we started seeing people were getting killed from that list, one after another, once every month, I would say. And in the meantime, government has successfully weaponized a blasphemy law. It already had a blasphemy law, but it weaponized it by saying, if you are seen saying something that could potentially harm religious sentiment of the people, everything is quite vague, by the way. There is no definition of what religious sentiment means, what hurting of that sentiment means, or who's the people, etc. But said, if somebody is found, he would be arrested without a warrant, he would be detained indefinitely without possibility of a bail, and if convicted, he would serve 14 years of jail, and he would have to pay 100,000 UK equivalent of pound, 1 koti taka in Bangladeshi. Quite unimaginable. If you kill somebody, you could get 2 years, 3 years, 5 years jail. You could sometimes walk free. But if you write something on Facebook, potentially you could face 14 years of jail and essentially end of your life as it is. BBC obviously was all over it when the killing started. It's a new word, right? Disbeliever. He meant to say disbeliever, or I don't know what. So kill him. He's very happy to say that. That sort of instruction set he gets. And to make things worse, the last nail in the coffin, the Prime Minister, she's the supreme leader of Bangladesh right now, and probably foreseeably future. She said about the bloggers who are beginning, because there was huge amount of international pressure happening on Bangladesh, saying that you need to do something, you need to at least denounce these killers. Government was not interested in denouncing the killers. She came out and said, if someone wants to kill someone because of what we wrote, the government will do nothing to prevent it. It's not government's responsibility. That's what she said. And after every killing, we saw either ministers or police superintendent would come out and claim that, no one should cross the line. That's what they would say. They would say, oh, yes, we're going to try to find the killers, but nobody should write stuff that could potentially kill them. Obviously, they could not find people. See those two boys? They are behind this killing. And what's interesting about this killing, he's a friend of mine, only very young guy, 23 years of age, very good satirist. Their main focus is above neck. They kill people by stabbing, hitting the neck, and they're trained. Apparently, there is a training camp where they are taken, and then they use machetes, and they say how you hit it, and they have like a tree trunk, dead tree trunk, and they would practice on it so that they could do the job and then leave very quickly. Quite a good operation, I should say. But you can see they're not very old, less than 20 years old, but they're brainwashed. And they think they're righteous, that they think it's okay to do this. They have no remorse, no guilt feeling. They're doing something really important in their mind. Parade going on. Some guy who was another blogger, Islamist blogger, who was inviting people to kill us. He was arrested. Obviously, he was released because inviting to kill atheists is not a crime, by the way. If we talk against Muhammad, that's a crime, but he can do fine. That's fine. The reason I show you these two pictures is because who wants sunglasses indoors other than rock stars? It's a show. That's my point. It's a show. That's what they're doing. There's a little video I think I could play. It's a BBC.
A Bangladeshi publisher has been hacked to death in Dhaka. The attack happened hours after 3 others were wounded in a similar but separate attacks. The publisher Faisal Arifin Deepon worked with Avijit Roy, the atheist.
I want to pause here for a second. I didn't talk about the publishers, by the way. The bloggers, some of the bloggers also were science writers, authors, and they had books published. And the killing started spreading from bloggers to people related to bloggers. So this guy was a publisher of a book. Obviously, publishers publish any book, right? He also published Islamist books, but apparently publishing a book of a blogger, famous blogger called Abhijit Roy, and that's why he was
blogger
killed.
Murdered by suspected Islamists in February. In Saturday's attack, armed men stormed into the publisher's offices and hacked him to death. Well, earlier I spoke to Arif Rahman, a Bangladeshi blogger living in London, who had known the victim of this latest attack.
He was the owner of publishing called Jagriti Prakashani, and he was one of the few publishers who were unafraid of publishing books that are of humanist, atheist, and science nature. And that's why I think he was being targeted. And his father, he's a university professor. And today he said in remorse that we are not going to ask the government for the punishment or even prosecution of the killers, because we have seen them so many times. And this person was threatened so many times before, but he denied those fear and threats, and he continued his publishing. And that's why he's being silenced.
Now, this is the latest in a series of attacks that have taken place against secular bloggers, writers, publishers. Has anyone been brought to justice so far for any of the attacks?
When you say brought to justice, we would assume you're talking about going to prosecution, charging, and then trial, and then conviction. No, nothing has happened of that sort. Only some arrests has taken. And a murder that took place 2 years ago, only very recently a charge sheet was submitted, and that's a long-winded process. And they blame everything on the opposition. They're not willing to actually admit that there is an Islamist rising happening in Bangladesh. Unfortunately, Bangladesh government has elements within the government and the Awami League party that are pro-Islamist. So, protection is not taking place. Okay, so I just want to show you, because at that time there has been tremendous amount of outcry from the international community on Bangladesh authorities to do something about it and prosecute them or at least arrest them. Nothing was happening. It shows who is actually more powerful in Bangladesh. So these are some of the friends of mine. This is Washikur Rahman Babu, who you just saw lying with his face covered. This is a science, Ananta Vijay Das, killed exactly the same way on his way to work in front of his house. He was a Little Mag editor, a science writer, and also a kind of a local organizer of groups, exactly like, atheist, secular, humanist society, where you exercise or you talk about these things. He was doing the same thing in a remote part of Bangladesh. This is the first murdered blogger, 2013, Rajiv Haidar. He was a architect and a satirist. Abhijit Roy was, you must have heard about his name, prominent blogger, author as well, one of our monuments in our arena. So, but the killings did not only stop killing only bloggers. You saw the murder of the publisher, but then over this year, 2016, we have seen so many of these other killings. It's not only the bloggers, it's also, for example, Nikhil Jawardar, a Hindu tailor. He was just a tailor, average Joe, had nothing to do with, blogging. But apparently, or allegedly, he said something about one day, not recently, 3 years ago, he may have said about human criminality. They said if you are religious and if you say that being more religious makes you more human and more better people, I see a lot of people who has the beard, the Islamic beard, but they're not really good people. He was just pointing out, but somebody took offense on it, and 3 years later, he was killed because of that. It looks like people were trying to find excuses to execute people on their own. And we have Italian national, he was also killed, Japanese national killed. And then we have police constables, general secular activist. He was not even a blogger, he was just a secular activist. Never said a thing about Muhammad or Islam. Because he professes secularism, he's killed. Professor, university professor, killed exactly the same way. His fault was that he organized cultural groups in his university for students. So, for example, cultural events, and in his own house, he would have groups of people doing music and everything. I don't know what's the equivalent here. You must have professors who loves music and who wants to practice music and, as an activism or just an activist. Because he was promoting music, that was his fault. Because music is kind of, in the orthodox sense of Islam, music is banned and haram. Just to show you that the killers did not just stop by taking care of the people who allegedly hurt Islamic, sensitivity. They kind of spread around, and they. So in a proper Islamic country, there would be only one type of Muslim. It's a very intolerant type of philosophy they have, that everybody else should either submit to Islam or become second-class citizen. That's actually a fact in Islam. People were very afraid to write. So you know that Saudi Arabia has passed law declaring atheists as terrorists. You know that, right? Saudi Arabia actually have a law that if you are an atheist, you don't actually have to be vocally atheist. If somebody realized you are an atheist, you will be classed as a terrorist in Saudi eyes. So Saudis are trying to create their own parallel of everything. So the Western world calls the religious extremist as terrorist. They come up with their own version of terrorist, being the atheist. I talked about the law, the blasphemy law, weaponized. That's called Section 57 in Bangladesh terms. And just to show, International Humanist and Ethical Union, IHU, has done a really good job of compiling the state of freedom of speech throughout the world. And this map quite nicely shows the problem areas. The darkest ones are the worst. And you can see here, obviously this is Saudi Arabia, the source of the problem, and it spreads that way. You have the India and then little Bangladesh over there. really dark. The human rights conditions are bad. And the next one is China. But China comes in a different category. It's like repressive state. It's not the Islamist type, but freedom of speech is also curtailed over in that region. And the bloggers, I call it caught between rock and a hard place. The reason I'm saying this is at this time, even these days in Bangladesh, if you are known to be a blogger and if somebody is after you, they can kill you. Islamists, they can kill you, they can sort you out, but you can't go to the police. Because if you go to the police, they will ask you why you fear for your life. And they say, I may have said some dodgy stuff about Muhammad and religion. And they say, okay, but that's a crime. Please come into the jail. So it's not very easy for somebody to survive, You can't ask for protection from the state. In a civilized state, you should be able to, but in Bangladesh, you are not able to. And that's the problem. So this is the problem at this moment, culture of impunity. And how this is actually affecting, this has nothing to do with bloggers. This has nothing to do with religion. But these people are indigenous people in our country. The eastern side of our country has borders with Myanmar, Burma, which is a kind of a hilly area and lots of Oriental people. So historically, there has been some indigenous people living in the hills. We call them Adivashi. The people, the general Bengali people, are now going to the hills and then claiming their lands, the hill tribes' lands. They're just murdering them, burning their houses with police force. Because there is no rule of law and there is a culture of impunity, these sort of things are happening inside Bangladesh. And I can't actually update the whole lot. Even in the last week, Hindu villages were being burned. I may have a photo somewhere. There you go. These are actually Hindu. Remember the original religion I said in Indian subcontinent? Obviously, there has been a lot of people living in Bangladesh still of Hindu religion, but in fear. And Muslim just gangs would go and vandalize their worship places. It's as if some Muslim gang rushing to, South Bank and destroying Christmas trees, something like that. Things that people celebrate were being vandalized. And Hindu villages were being burned. Exactly, this has actually happened last week for no good reason. Obviously, they come up with a reason. They say one of the Hindu guys shared a photo that depicted Muhammad badly. But if you go back and ask, is this Facebook account actually belong to this guy? If you investigate, you will see that actually one of these guys, the Muslims, actually created this context to do that. And the result is obviously the Hindus then leave for India, India being a predominantly Hindu country these days, and the land is up for grabs. In a very small space, 170 million people, land is very premium. So this intolerance and culture of impunity is being used to, cause more problems for others. I think that's about it. That's my Facebook thing, and that banner has been there for last 4 years because they were challenging me, saying, "Oh, you must be afraid. You live outside of Bangladesh, and you don't really, you're really afraid to actually come back to Bangladesh. So if you come to Bangladesh, we will sort you out." So I put this up, and in 2015, I went to Bangladesh for 2 months. Everybody knew. And one day I was going to the book fair where Abhijit Rai was murdered. And, I announced that I'm going to go to the book fair, and this is my face and everything, so do something if you want to. And it's been there forever. It's not a really appetizing banner, but there it is. That's my Twitter, if you want to connect. And that brings us to the end. Questions if anybody wants to. Thank you.
So you talk about the current state about the population, if it's systematic education, but it's still a religious education. As a secularist, how do you tackle that? How do you see change being brought about? Is it from external pressure from other countries, or do you see it within Bangladesh? How do you see change coming about?
Well, I'm going to sound a bit pessimistic. Your question was how do I see change of the religious education? How can we change? Is it from external party and if from internal? I'm quite pessimistic about this because I haven't talked about the political issue, by the way. The political forces are quite interested in using Islam, and they're more interested in making it more and more strong. So the religious education that was gaining its power and momentum is not going to stop because the political entities and the political system in Bangladesh feeds on it. So I don't see anything, I'm quite pessimistic. They say, if economic situation improves, then we can spend more money on our mainstream education, and then the madrasa education will go down. I don't see that happening because I'm seeing the opposite. The mainstream education system is being under attack multiple ways. The education system itself, the curriculums are being, operated on multiple times. The teachers who are the building blocks of the education system are actually being severely punished. I think that same thing is happening in the UK as well. British Humanist Association has a separate work going on to help the primary education teachers. And also, before every public examination, we have public examination like GCSE, and we have like secondary and intermediate exams, public exams where everybody, and within 1 day before the exam comes out, there would be the exam papers are going to be leaked in Facebook. Everybody would have papers. You can imagine what sort of output would come out from that sort of education system. On the other hand, madrasas are growing, lots of more madrasas, and they have come out. They're very smart. They know how to make themselves self-sustaining economically, and they know how to create an ecosystem so that they don't really have to rely on. Before, they used to rely on Saudi money, but I think Saudi money is gradually drying up, but they found a way to self-sustain. And so I don't see any happen. Pressure from international only started happening recently when these murders, the ISIS guys I showed earlier, they killed those Japanese and Italian, they were actually engineers working in a project. So the government, European Union said, what the hell is going on? And then they kind of went out and killed another few bunch, because government have a CIA type wing called DGFI, which is like Pakistani ISI. They are behind kind of doing all these things. So, but the pressure is being felt by the businesses inside Bangladesh because they're losing image, they're losing customers, they're losing orders. But that's not good enough because Bangladesh has a really strong ally, which is Saudi Arabia. Organization of Islamic Countries, there is a huge interest in Bangladesh. So unless and until that fixes itself, I don't see it happening. It's actually worsening. I know you wanted to hear some hope, but I don't have the hope and quite pessimistic watching what's happening. Okay, so just to understand what you asked is about the future, right? How secularism inside Bangladesh can grow and what the international organizations can do to make it happen. That was your question, right? Kind of. So obviously, me being here was quite interesting from the very beginning because by the way, I didn't clarify this. A lot of people think that I am an asylum seeker here, but I'm not. And I was always here, and I actually I shouldn't say I ran the movement, but I was a key part of it. And being here kind of gave me an opportunity to see how the more Western world works, and then translating it in. I write mostly in Bengali, and my colleagues in Bangladesh and in other places, we work together. But when all these things started happening in 2013, obviously I worked closely with International Humanist and Ethical Union. You saw that report you saw earlier, the Bangladesh chapter, I edited that. BHA, I work quite closely with, and few other organizations. The thing I see that every time I go and speak to them, they say, we can only do so much. Like BHA was lobbying the Foreign Office. That's their mechanism, the Foreign Office. The Foreign Office can obviously summon the ambassador and everything, but end of the day, Bangladesh was not feeling the heat from the international bodies. One of the reasons is Saudi Arabia, because end of the day, if you're not subject to any kind of pressure, then why should you listen to people? Bangladesh is not dependent on international, for example, the European Union or anybody. Maybe they get aid and stuff, but they can choose to say, we don't want the aid. Because when they have to decide between their religion and faith and everything, they will say, we choose the faith. F it. So we tried putting pressure on. That's what I'm trying to say. We tried putting pressure on. It doesn't work. They don't care because they have the bigger friend next to them, Saudi Arabia, biggest American ally and everything. So it's a very, very bad situation internally in Bangladesh. And my fear, one of the reasons I think what I'm saying to you might be useful is Bangladesh is a test lab. So it's like in a laboratory, you create a condition of a disease, how bad it can be. I'm just talking hypothetically. I'm not a medical student or anything. I'm just conceptually saying that to see how bad something can become or how extreme it can become, you can create a condition, a lab, or like a mini universe. Bangladesh is like that. So if you see a modern country becoming Islamist, but not really destroying itself like Pakistan did, Bangladesh is a very good example of what the rest of the world can become. Media is very functional over there. The methods are working, the instruments are there, but it's like crippled. My problem is, or my concern is, it may happen to other part of the world. And I have seen, for example, England is a very good example of it. We have a huge chunk of Muslim population. If they're left to their own devices, they could become that mini universe, and that can manifest itself. And the biggest supplier of ISIS soldiers, other than obviously the Middle Eastern countries, is United Kingdom. 700 young kids who were taught in the English education system went there to fight. How did that happen? The same thing can happen other places. So the methods that are tested in Bangladesh are, I think, the Islamist system, that is a global system, uses it in other places of other parts of the world. So trying to change Bangladesh will not work only. If you can't go back to the root, which I think is not only Saudi Arabia, it's also the United Kingdom, which also needs to do something about it, and also United States. Because I don't know, it's quite mixed, because you saw the rumors or the leaks that Anonymous did, right? So Hillary Clinton was behind ISIS. I don't know how many of us believe that. Maybe we do. But United States did not destroy ISIS the way it could destroy other places. It was actually helping Saudi Arabia bomb Yemen. Yemen was the country that decided to stood up to Saudi Arabia. But American fighters were bombing Yemen, killing innocent people. Nobody said anything. If the same thing happened in Syria, in Palestine, people would have huge outrage, but not in Yemen, because Saudi Arabia was against Yemen. So unless and until these things are fixed, I don't see any hope for Bangladesh. Very grim, I know. It's Wednesday, right? Today? Okay. At least it's not Friday. Weekend could have been ruined for us.
So what you're saying is basically you want to see a change in the way that the West interacts with Islam, and then that as a whole, the change in that interaction would lead to a change in Bangladesh. Would it be fair to say that Bangladesh is a symptom rather than the problem itself?
Thank you. You actually put it the issue quite nicely, eloquently. Thank you for that. So the reason I'm repeating what people are saying, because I'm recording and we're going to put it up on YouTube. So your statement didn't come. So I'm going to repeat it for others' sake, is that you're saying Bangladesh is not a problem on its own. It's a symptom of a problem. And unless and until we go and fix the problem, it's going to continue to happen. So yes, absolutely. I know how to fix this. I think a lot of our colleagues already know how to fix this. First, fix the mosques here in the UK. Fix the religious education system that breeds religious nutters. Fix them, control them, contain them, tackle them. That's where the problem starts, because if you don't stop radicalization, and that happens in a massive scale, you can't stop the problem, because Islamists need foot soldiers. Their power comes from the mob, the fear of the mob. If you don't allow the mob to become the mob, then you cut them off from the power. But the mob is a useful tool for certain political elements. For example, in Bangladesh, the reason I'm saying Bangladesh is a good example, because in Bangladesh, the mob is not out of control. It's controlled by the government itself. So the government has machineries. So if the government wants, they would allow them to come. They would give them buses and stuff, and they would actually come to the capital. They would seize the capital, and it actually has happened. I'm not talking hypothetically. It has happened in Bangladesh. In 2013, 5th of May, a huge madrasa student population from all over the country came to Bangladesh, and it was almost like a military. They had uniforms. You saw some of the examples. White dress with the headgear. A lot of them came, and then they started kind of vandalizing the whole city, taking things apart and everything. Middle of the night, government decided this is enough. We have taught the secularists and humanists a lesson. This could happen. But the government just, middle of the night, they were doing a sit-down. I think almost 1 million of them. Not million, 0.1 million? 0.1 million? Like 100,000? Is that a 1 million? Difficult. Because in my head, I do calculation in my own numbering system, Bengali numbering system. So it's difficult for me we would say 1 lakh. 1 lakh is 100,000 people actually. So 100,000 people. They were more than that. They were kind of doing a stampede, and they were getting ready to kind of have a snooze for the following day to do more harms. Government just decided to shut down all the lights of the streets, and they started throwing stun grenades around them, and they obviously woke up. They got nothing to do, and from 3 sides they attacked them, combined force, military, and all the different forces. They had a good plan. They surrounded them, but left one side open from the city. They just left the city overnight. The city was empty the following day. Government is under control, but it uses them. The same thing could happen in the military, but not paid for, and its control mechanism is different. So, yeah, I mean, if you can control those things, the solution can come quite easily. But I don't think the power or the people who are in power really wants to control this. They have other things in their mind. Conspiracy theory, the way Donald Trump won, one of its elements was, we will not let the Muslims enter the country, right? Brexit, how did that happen? We were afraid that Turkey would join European Union, and they're going to flood the country, so shut the borders. One of the elements, right? Don't deny it. It was in people's mind. So Muslims are coming is a political tool. I'm sure the Muslims have something to do with it, but I think it's fanned, it's funneled. But would that make me sound like an Islamist apologist? No, I don't think so. I hope not. Before I was obviously against Islamists, but I realized that general people are general people, you know. This is a university, and people who study here knows how to manage people. That's the leaders do, right? We are making leaders from here. But general people who doesn't go to university or, you know, they should be managed properly. The management is happening wrongly and for bad purposes. I don't know how much of it made sense to you, but that's the best I can do for the time being. Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's a very solid question. I'm going to repeat what you asked. You said, do I think the rhetoric that the right-wingers are actually giving us is something that could potentially reinforce the Islamists, and they become more radical, and this can be used for other political, something like that, right? It was a good point, and obviously I destroyed your comment. I would start from a comparison. The country I come from is predominantly Muslim country. Other religion are minority. But in the West, it's opposite. Muslims are actually the minority. So thinking about Muslims as a minority group and then kind of saying things about them is obviously problematic. And this is one thing I'm just going to say. The second thing, I know you are struggling to understand what I'm trying to say, but again, I'm not a professional speaker. Obviously, have you heard of the concept of clash of civilization? Yeah? Do you buy into that? The Huntington theory? No?
Could you go over it quickly?
Very simple, very simple. This guy, American philosopher back in the 70s, maybe, or 60s, he said, the world is getting modern, but it's not getting equally modern. And at some point, modern technology are going to help create silos of culture. That's what basically I understand Huntington said, is that you're going to have a Western culture, you're going to have an Islamic culture, and a few other small cultures here and there, but they're going to start clashing with each other with the dominance and acceptance, etc., etc. That's clash of civilization theory. And I think Americans, CIA liked it very much because the more problems you have, the easier for you to sell arms and control people, etc. So everything you see today, I mentioned earlier Brexit and in Donald Trump, I think they're part of the same thread. This Muslim thing is, I'm not saying the Islamists are actually not that bad, but it's actually being used. So it will continue to happen. It will continue to happen. And the way Islamists radicalize general Muslims and turn them into Islamists, is by showing them that Donald Trump has said these things. And people obviously have pride. If you are not assimilated into, or if you don't buy into the host culture, in this case, for example, English culture or American culture, or in general Western culture, you isolate yourself and you seek for some sort of cultural reference. Unfortunately, Islam is not a cultural reference. It's quite opposite. It's a lack of culture, in my definition of culture. But to them, praying 5 times a day and putting a tent over a woman and doing all these things, to them, that's their culture, that they think. Unfortunately, they're immigrant communities, most of them. You will not find many converted Muslims in UK or in other parts of the world. Most of them would be, for example, people like us going to a country, and then, obviously multiple generation growing. But because there is a inherent, I should say, designed block between the two cultures, the clash is happening. And obviously political systems are using that clash and they're fanning on that they're drawing power from that. So if the Muslim problem was not happening, I think Donald Trump, his win, and Brexit would not be that easy. There may be Brexit supporters here, but I'm not a big fan of Brexit because I thought European Union was doing good. Obviously, it had flaws, but then again, I don't want Turkish people to come in the UK either. So maybe I'm happy Brexit happened. I don't know how much of that answers your question, though. Oh, good point. Good point. A lot of people say, oh, I was a devout Muslim up until this thing and this happened to me and then I became ex-Muslim. A lot of people say that, my colleagues say that. For me, I think I was never a good Muslim. I was lucky enough to have a father who did not shove religion down my throat. He obviously, it's a social thing. When a child is growing up and he's of a certain age, a mullah would come to the house for a month or so. He would teach him or her memorize the bare minimum surah, we call them, like verses, for them to be able to go and do the 5 times prayer. It's like mandatory. If you don't do that, you are seen by the society as a bad Muslim or bad guy. So my father did that. The mullah came 3 months. Obviously, I memorized the Arabic without realizing what this is. And then he left, and that's the only religious thing happened to me. Obviously, we used to go to the mosque once a week. That was the Sunday service for Friday. But I did not take things very seriously. I thought this was just like a guidance, and it's not. It's only very late when I started blogging, when I interacted with other devout Muslims, I realized that people really take these things for real. I was never a kind of a devout believer. I never thought this reality. I never actually actualized in my brain that this is happening. On top of that, I lived in the capital, and I was lucky enough to have friends who introduced me to public libraries when I was doing my 12th grade, actually 10th grade. And there were some really nice public libraries. The Central University Public Library had a children's section, and somebody made a mistake of, having some books which are general science books for kids, English, illustration, how, for example, how a fulcrum works, how natural law works, general science stuff. At that age, for me to actually see that and how the world actually works, made me think that, yes, this makes more sense. So it made sense to me. Really, it made sense to me. And then now I realize, but at that time I didn't realize, Carl Sagan destroyed me. We had the Cosmos showing every Thursday between, I think, during the day around 4 p.m. I came back from school, it was on telly, just watched it. Obviously, I didn't understand the whole English at that time, but I liked the visualization of the stars and universe and everything. That destroyed me too. So that's how I never became a proper religious person. And then when I was in the uni, I got in touch. I was exposed to a professor whose writings were quite powerful. Quite powerful, very good, powerful writer, Professor Humanism, who was also stabbed and killed the same way because of his writing. And he showed that I knew always these things are bullshit, but he had the audacity to actually write these things in a way that I said, this is bullshit. And since that day, I became, I'm an atheist. I kind of realized that I'm an atheist. So that's my story. But when I became a blogger, why I became a blogger, if you go to the, the mullahs were telling us this is wrong. This is bidawat, they were calling. They were saying girls dancing around, enticing men and not having headscarves and stuff. This is Hinduani. They were very much against the local system, the Hindu religion. Anything that, for example, Hindu religion would have lots of use of flowers, music, and dancing and everything, and lighting up candles and diya, they call it, Deepavali. That thing was very much against. So anything that was lively, part of your life that makes you feel good, was very much against Islam. So I said, you guys are wrong. This can't be bad. So we had to kind of take arms, but our arms was our writing. That was it. That's what we did. And we thought that's all we can do as a general people. We were not part of any political system. Our fight wasn't political, although we realized later that what we were doing was, in a way, a political activity, although it was not part of any hegemony in that sense. Make sense? I wish there were more, but libraries are something in the mass scale, in the villages. If somebody like me goes back to his village and says, I'm going to do a library, who's with me? There's going to be 5 people for it. There's going to be some money, but there's going to be 50 people against it. And the leader would be the local mullah. He's not interested in a library because apparently libraries makes children devil. Books are bad. So Boko Haram, although they're not going to call themselves, but the concept is kind of similar. That happens everywhere. That would be end of my show. Any other questions? Maybe not. Very hungry, everyone, right? Yeah? So if I get it right, you're saying, do I think Islam is a tolerant religion? That's a good question, actually. So you're asking if I think Islam is tolerant to itself, but intolerant to other religion. That's a very good question. My answer would be to ask not to you, but kind of rhetorical, is what is Islam? Because there is no standard version of Islam, by the way, in my view. Because the Islam that, for example, my parents grew up learning is called Sufism. It's a very more non-political, human type of Islam that actually was practiced inside Indian subcontinent because Hinduism was surrounding us. So Islam had to be evolved into a more docile. But when it gained power, it became more violent and became Wahhabi, which is the Salafi, the more violent one. So even within Islam, you have Shia and the Sunnis, the Iraq and Iran and the Saudis, they are still fighting between themselves. So I think if we speak about specific, for example, Sunnis, yes, Sunnis are tolerant at each other to a degree that is really unhealthy. So for example, a Sunni does something really dodgy. If we say, Muslim brother, it's fine. But obviously, it's a different ecosystem, different set of rules and everything applies. It's really intolerant to any other things. It's a very open, aggressive. So it would demand, for example, the Muslims migrate here, who would demand, we want mosques everywhere, anywhere possible. And they say mosque should be the center of culture. But in Bangladesh, mosques are actually something people just go and not everybody goes. And it mostly villages, it's got some sort of a, people have this need to have a purpose and everything, general people. Obviously, we don't, right? We are atheists, secularists, and humanists. Not funnily, seriously, the general people need some sort of consoling and other, reason for them. But for some reason here, mosques have become a center of activity for anything, and that's the result of the multiculturalism, which I think is a result of the silo thing, that clash of civilization. So the silo building is done intentionally, and the multiculturalism, the term, I don't know if you heard, is actually a government policy to work with the community leaders and isolate everything that's behind the community leader. And the Sharia law and the Sharia courts, that's actually literally saying, you guys, you brown people can have your own legal system. Just don't come out and talk to us or don't damage us. Very racist comment, I know, but I'm brown, I can say that. So multiculturalism is actually enforcing the Huntington's theory and making the Huntington's theory work. So what I was going to say, being intolerant with other religions, yes, mosques. But if you go to Saudi Arabia, you can't even ask for a church. Saudi Arabia will not allow you to build a church. No, you can be a non-religious person, but to Saudi Arabia, you are a second-class citizen. Even if you become a Saudi national, being a Christian, as if it happens, you can't. In a proper Muslim state or proper extremist or Wahhabi Salafi state, you are not allowed to practice your own religion. You either become a second-class citizen and you pay tax for being a non-Muslim. That's a fact, by the way. It's not fictitious or it's not just it's a proper Islamic rule. So there you go. That's my take on it.